Hello there, welcome to NTV Today. My name is Laban Serio, and as always, we begin to take a look at what's on your dailies today. Of course, on your copy of the Business Daily, we tell you of the court battle revealing the tycoon Dan Mundalji and his vast estate. We also tell you about Safaricom and it having opposed a device management system suggested by the Communication Authority, that's CA, and also Safaricom saying that this will infringe on customer privacy and in turn hurt revenues. A lot more on the economy, corporate and money market segment, only on your copy of the Business Daily. Very well, away from what's on your dailies today to a report that has been launched today. Now, in a recently released report on African tourism, now, UNCTAD says that the continent is lagging behind in terms of tourism numbers. The United Nations agency says that Africa contributed to a 4.4% share in the world tourism arrivals. That's in 2015. They say that there is a need to create more awareness on inter-regional tourism in Kenya and also promote Africa as a tourism hub. And also boosting tourism contribution to economical numbers and also looking at how Kenya and other African countries can be sustainable to have tourists even during low season. Now, to speak on this and more, we're joined by Madam Carmen Mbigira, who's the regional coordinator in the East African platform. And also, of course, this was a joint report by United Nations Trade and Development Agency. So, Carmen, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Let's talk about that 4.4%. We are not really maximizing our potential as African.
Yes, I think that was one of the output of this report, but the report also helped us with empirical evidence that there's a potential for tourism in Africa. If you consider that our tourism contribution to the economic growth and GDP between 2011 and 2015 was up to $70 billion US, and then it's forecast to be at 73% at the end of this year, there's growth for tourism. And 1 out of 14 people who work on the continent of Africa is actually working directly or indirectly in the tourism sector.
All right.
Yes. I
know you're calling it like largely East African. We're going to come and talk about the East African single tourist visa.
Correct.
But before you go that, if you just map out Africa, if you look at West Africa, East Africa, and South Africa, how does it fare? Where are you seeing more potential? Where are you seeing more activity?
I think we know, it's not I think, I know. The tourism is actually, when you look at the numbers, we have Egypt, Morocco and Tunisia leading when it comes to the continent of Africa, and followed by South Africa or some of the Southern Africa countries. East Africa comes into third position, but also we need to look at Africa in a more holistic manner. West Africa has a different market, it's a different market, and then East Africa is a different market. So what the report is helping us to do is to understand that the African tourists are emerging to be powerhouse for tourism. Before we even go outside, whether we go to the US, Europe, or even Asia, we are here on the continent of Africa, and the more can be done to harness the sector and then improve how we do business, whether it's in terms of marketing, whether in terms of product diversification, and also about the pricing. Why is Dubai competing with East Africa when it comes to leisure or shopping?
Is it an issue of the product offering, perhaps? Because I know for a long time we've always positioned Africa to be the safari destination.
Correct, yes.
Is it perhaps we've
we still have, we are still depending so much on that particular product, and then over-reliance on the source market, the traditional source market. I think the focus from the report here is let's work together to satisfy the needs of the new African who's traveling, whether it's for business, for leisure, for family and friends and relatives, for any other purposes, because we can actually connect Africa, but we have also some challenges we have to resolve in terms of open sky policy, connectivity, and then visa on arrival, and the cost of traveling. It's quite expensive to travel on the continent.
As the East African tourism platform, what are some of your top key areas that you're challenging the government to kind of talk about, especially to the private sector, in terms of just opening up that tourism potential?
I think from the private sector, we need to look at, you mentioned something on seasonality. You have issues of seasonality if you depend only on one market. So if you focus now on the domestic market and the regional market, you should not have issues of seasonality. I think we have seen with the Madaraka Express train what this is doing for Mombasa. Number two is our policy reforms have to reflect the demand of the East African right now. We need to see our policymakers understanding that this is a sector which has potential to grow and help other intersectoral, whether it's agriculture, arts, craft. It's a very holistic sector. The third point is connectivity. We need to move from point A to B in a cheap and affordable manner. Nairobi and Entebbe is the most expensive route. Why? So those are the questions we need our policymakers. We need to make it easier and then for everybody. In East Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, you don't need a passport. You can actually use your national ID and then travel. So those are the things we want to see. Private sector is driving the tourism sector, but supported by the public sector.
How's been the uptake of the single tourist visa? Because I know this was largely promoted, especially towards the end of last year. And of course, the East African community has even challenged the government to actually just kind of spur that growth of tourism through that. How's been the growth of the
uptake of the single tourist visa? Remember, it was launched in 2014. So we are in pretty much on our third year here. The last numbers we have, you know, single tourist visa almost has like generated over 1.5 million US dollars. So Rwanda and Uganda and Kenya, you are promoting a destination which is not just come to Kenya, it's come to Kenya and visit other country. It's a tool we need to use to promote a destination where you move from one place to another and to another place. We need to have the sense that this is not just a product, it's a product part of a bigger product offering. It's not because you have a visa to come to Kenya and Rwanda, Uganda, but what am I going to do there? If our price is not right, our product is not competitive, and third, if coming to East Africa is still expensive, then the visa will not work. Yes, the single tourist visa is working and it's really working well, but it has to be in complementarity with other products we are offering as a multi-country destination.
Very well. I just need to bring this to attention to our viewers. Of course, as we mentioned, this was a product that was jointly developed by the United Nations Trade Development Agency. We had Junior Davis, who was also the chief in charge of Africa division at UNCTAD. But Carmen, I'm just wondering, why is it that we have an international agency, it's a trade agency, quite really interested in terms of looking at how we can maximize the potential of tourism?
Yes.
Are you sensing the same level of interest from African governments?
I think this report, for me, the reason why it's very important is the first time we're actually looking at tourism in terms of numbers. We have projection up to almost like 2030. We are looking at what tourism can do in terms of international trade and then in the service industry. You know, this agency is looking at the whole continent in a holistic manner. But this is a tool we are going to use to lobby our governments at every point we have an opportunity to tell them that the growth of tourism has to be supported by significant policies which can actually drive the whole tourism sector in the continent of Africa.
All right.
Yes.
And of course, I'll ask you this because I know you come from Burundi.
Yes.
And of course, so you've seen conflict as it stands and how it has impact on business.
Yes.
And I know from a regional perspective, we're getting into an election here. There's always that a wait and see approach towards an election, especially politics influencing tourism. What would you say about this?
I think we all know that security, peace, and stability for any tourism destination is paramount. It's very crucial. So it's all about actually the narrative. We believe that you, the media, you are the one feeding us. Whether we know breaking the news that you should not go to Kenya. I think that's something we all know it's happening. But it's once again because we are still relying so much on the same source market. I think if the United States issue a travel warning, then the American market will probably say we are not coming to Kenya in 2017. We'll wait until 2018. But I bet someone from Nigeria or South Africa or even Egypt will not hesitate to come to do business here if he has business to do in Kenya, because our way of doing business, we know that election is a one-day event. Most of the time, I think you had a successful election in 2012, and then I don't see why it should not happen. In the case of Burundi, of course, the media has a huge role to play, and then the image we see from Burundi is not really conducive for tourism. But as a region, we need to all package our destination and then use the right narrative. Yes.
Speaking of which, actually, Burundi is a beautiful country. I mean, there's
beautiful.
a lot of offerings out there.
Yes.
But again, there's that perception that,
yes.
you normally have that
yes.
perhaps maybe might be political instability that, will discourage any foreign tourists from visiting.
I think it's more reason why actually this philosophy of promoting East Africa as one destination counts. If 1 year one country is going through election, then we diversify our source market and say, hey, visit Rwanda, visit Tanzania, visit Uganda, and visit Kenya. So we don't fall into that trap of always election. When there's an election, don't go to Kenya, don't go to Rwanda, don't go to Tanzania. That should not be the case. And beside, the domestic market or the African markets, they're here. They're not going anywhere. We are not going to pack and say, I'm not going to be here. I'm from Burundi. I'm not going to pack my suitcase in August. I'll be here. Definitely I'll be here. Yes.
Because you're in East Africa.
I'm in East Africa.
But let's look at, of course, conference tourism. But before I get into that, and really come into the defense of the media, yes, you'd say that perhaps it's what we will report or what is on the papers, what's on the screens. But then again, have you tried a different approach, which is really to talk to the embassies, talk to kind of the consulates represented in per country, and just kind of give them feedback on how exactly the tourism offering is doing, because we would actually go with the travel advisory issued by the representatives here.
I think each country is doing the same. I think I salute very much the CS, Mr. Balala. He's been engaging every country representative in this country. I remember last year there was sensitization, and also make sure that the information which is coming out of Kenya is specifically, if something is happening in Nairobi, it's not the whole city which is burning. It's maybe one street where something is happening. Let's just be specific. And then the private sector who are selling, they are the ones actually losing clients. So the business is being affected because you cannot sell a destination when someone says, I can't come to Kenya, I know things are not working. We need to work together. I think it's a public and private sector approach. We need to all work together, and specifically at this critical time. I know we are almost like a few months down the road, actually 1 month down the road, and then we need to work together. Yes.
So conference tourism, we have, of course, Rwanda trying to really come very strongly in the convention center. Kenya, just so you know, we actually also having a convention center coming soon.
Convention bureau, yes.
So how do you sense that conference tourism is going, even as we talk about diversifying the safari and the beach tourism?
When it comes to MICE, this is a specific sector. This is a niche market. And then already Kenya, if you look at the number, Rwanda is really coming up, and they built the convention bureau. But let me say something. We should not look at Kenya and Rwanda. We should look at destination East Africa. If you look at all the conferences, if Rwanda doesn't have the availability or can't host an event, there's no reason why Kenya should not do it. So the focus is, let's bid for all these big conferences wherever they are. Let's convince that we are a destination of businesses, and let's pool all the partners we have in the MICE sector, and then promote East Africa as one destination for events and MICE and conferences and exhibitions. We can do it because the product we have is not just about the convention. It's a complementarity with other product, the safari, the beach, the ocean, the mountains, the gorillas. It's a holistic product. If you look at other destinations in Europe, I know people who are going to do conferences in Madrid, in Spain. It's not because it's just a particular city. They're looking at it in a very global manner. So we need to start thinking competition is stiff. Okay. Let's pull MICE and then say, come to East Africa. If you cannot do a conference in Rwanda, KICC or any other venue in Kenya will do it. In Tanzania, they are doing the same. In Uganda, they are about to have a policy on MICE. So we need to look at East Africa as one destination. Lastly, Carmen, the report is out. Actually, is quite interested in maximizing the tourism potential in Africa. So what are you going to do as the East African tourism platform? I think we worked with this agency to actually write the report. I think a section on interconnectivity between Africa and then inter-regional tourism, we contributed very much because they focus on East Africa and the success of East Africa. What we need to do now is to share this information, inform our policymakers what tourism can do in East Africa, whether it's tourism with gender, youth and women, employment, and then the economic growth of what tourism can do for the region. So now we are going to work with policymakers to digest the information in this report, and then look at how we can actually tap into the sector, because it has so much potential. Yes. Could you put a number to it? Well, if you look at the numbers, I think if you look at, I'm talking about inter-regional tourism in East Africa. You know, if you look at the case of Uganda and Rwanda, Uganda is your number 4 in terms of source market for Kenya, after US and UK and India. That number for me is not a surprise, because you do so much with Uganda. They should be your number 1 source market, but more can be done. Great. So when we look at also the number of, we are a population of 160 million of us in East Africa. Even if we can just tap into 1% of that, I'm just being humble here, then we will do much. Great. And then we look at Ethiopia, another powerhouse.
Yes.
There's so much we can do when it comes to tourism in this region.
Carmen Migire, I have to leave it at that. Of
Thank
course,
you.
a lot more talk about looking at tourism numbers in the region. Of course, in the view of the active report that was recently launched together with the East African Tourism Platform. We'll be speaking to Carmen Migire, who's a regional coordinator, and I'd like to leave it at that. And of course, bring you up to speed with this story. Uchumi Supermarkets needs you to shop from them as much as possible to help it pay its employees. That's the May and June salaries in the next 10 days. The retailers, suppliers have allowed revenues from sales from tomorrow, that's actually today, to go to paying salaries. Now, this follows a day marked by industrial action in various parts of the country by staff who are demanding their unpaid dues for May and June.
Up in arms, with their arms up in protest, holding up twigs, manila paper, and atop their voices, chorused frustrations. Workers of Uchumi supermarkets in various parts of the country refused to get to work and got to the streets demanding their dues even as their needs fell due.
Hatujalipwa mshahara kwa mwezi mbili. There is non-remittance of statutory reductions. Zinakatwa lakini hazilipwi. Medical cover hakuna. Mwaka mzima hatujapata pension.
The alleged non-remittance of the statutory deductions to the relevant bodies, despite the staff having the monies deducted from their pay, means that they, for instance, cannot get their hospital bills covered by the National Hospital Insurance Fund, NHIF, they say. And the picture the employees paint of the circumstances is not a pleasant one.
Sisi tunafanya kazi, rent hatujalipa, watoto wetu wako nyumbani, tunaleta uga hapa, watu wanakuja kung'ang'ania na sisi wenyewe hatuna pesa ya kulipa. Tuna uchungu sana.
Wanasema watatulipa pesa mbaya tarehe fulani. Tunangoja. Kama ni landlord nakupigia simu namwambia nitalipa pesa yako tarehe fulani. Kama ni mfanyikazi uko naye nitalipa pesa yako tarehe fulani. Kama ni mwalimu mkuu unamwambia utalipa pesa ya shule tarehe fulani. Alafu unakuta hizo tarehe wamesema hawajalipa pesa.
Amid it all, management has been accused of not acting empathetically towards the staff. Representatives of the Kenya Union of Commercial Food and Allied Workers, KOKFAO, went to Uchumi's headquarters in Nairobi where they signed a return to work formula with management. This states that May salaries will be paid from the 5th of July 2017, June salaries will be paid from 14th July 2017, there shall be no victimization of those who are demonstrating, and that all employees resume duty immediately. The company, which is still in the loss-making zone, says it has been having an arrangement with suppliers where the stock on the shelves is the suppliers and not Uchumi's to resell, and therefore the firm cannot use all the returns to pay salaries. However, it says that after negotiations, suppliers have agreed to have the proceeds from sales go to paying the arrears to workers from Wednesday, the 5th of July. Uchumi is banking on selling as much as possible so as to start paying from Wednesday. So, whatever is collected from sales will be paid to staff in groups, meaning some will ideally begin to get their May dues before others. The management hopes that the salaries owed for both months will be paid up by the 15th of July. Times and scenes like these highlight the need for the investor that the retailer has been looking for, with reports of one having been settled on, now awaiting a few more approvals. Until then, Uchumi's economy remains in the red.
And of course, that's more. You can get more details on that story on your copy of the Business Daily today. But of course, to an interview we promised earlier. Of course, what is the progress on connectivity right here in Nairobi? Of course, and across Kenya. We are honored to have none other than the Managing Director of Kenya Power, Mr. Tarus. Thank you so much for being here today. Of course, starting what we have there is our tag is Powering Kenya, and we're just looking at what are some of the initiatives, what are some of the progress you've made so far. Of course, we start with the last mile connectivity program. Preface.
Thank you very much. Now, when we talk about last mile program, this is a program that through the efforts of the government of Kenya, resources were sourced to ensure that access rates are increased. Remember, the government has a target of increasing the access rate to 70% and eventually universal access by the year 2020. In the last mile program, we have phase 1, which is currently ongoing, and this phase is on average about 56% in terms of its progression. And this is out of resources that came out from the African Development Bank to the tune of 13.5 billion shillings. We have other phases coming on board. Phase 2, which is currently under evaluation. We are actually almost going out to award. And resources in this phase 2 is coming from both the World Bank and the second phase of the African Development Bank. We have 15 billion shillings and 13.5 billion shillings respectively. We are also in discussions with the AFD, the French, to give us about 9 billion shillings, and JICA coming on board with about 6 billion shillings. So overall, we have then, put together resources to the tune of about 63 billion shillings to take care of last mile connectivity. Of course, discussions are still going with other financiers with a view to getting them on board and allow us drive this last mile agenda.
Based on target, if you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 into what you've achieved thus far, and it looks at a lot of interest, especially from financials, to work with Kenya Power, what score will you give yourself?
Well, at the risk of becoming overly ambitious, I would give myself a rating of 9.8%.
Oh goodness, that's quite
sort of
high.
9.8 out of 10.
Yes, yes. So what next? The issue has been also on reliability, because yes, you might really focus on expansion, but power reliability comes to question.
I appreciate we have had occasionally challenges on issues reliability, but as an institution we are alive to this fact, and we have set out resources as outlined in our strategic plan. Indeed, over the next 4 or 5 years, we are putting together resources to the tune of about 200 billion, which will allow us, not only expand our existing infrastructure, but also modify what we already have on board. And modification in this case would look at issues like building new substations, reconductoring our lines, replacing rotten poles, and so on and so forth, just in an effort to make sure that the network is robust, and therefore then allowing our customers to enjoy quality supply, as it were.
Impact on cost?
Of course, like I said, we mobilizing resources, but those are capital expenditures which will then be spread over a number of years. And that, I would say, will not have an impact on cost of power. But of course, these are investments that we expect as an institution to inject with an effort to getting an inflow of revenues going forward.
Am I right to say perhaps maybe when you're negotiating with financiers, you're basing it on current cost and you still want to maintain it as that? But then again, if you look at kind of greater distribution or more distribution of power, you'd expect just a slight decrease in the cost of power, especially to the small consumers.
Granted, and I will want to look at this from the what I would call the generation mix. And if you look at that mix as it were today, we are getting in a lot more renewable energy coming on board, more particularly injecting in a lot of geothermal. We also have wind power, we have solar, and so on and so forth. Unlike in the past where we were overly reliant on thermal generated power. Of course, we also have hydros, which if you are to look at the cost of generation, is what we would consider as the lowest cost in terms of cost of generating arising from each of the components. Now, having said that, we are looking at injecting a lot more renewable energy. Then the intention in all that is to bring down the cost of power, because unlike in the thermal generated power, where we have issues of foreign exchange, issues of fuel cost, in these other forms, we do not have those variables. And obviously then, if we inject in if we inject in power from renewable sources, then we would expect that the cost of power will gradually come down.
There recently has been a lot of works in Nairobi. What is quite interesting to note that there are underground cables coming through. What's the progress of this, and is this also part of your initiatives to kind of make it more reliable for industrial, especially now moving commercial, to your commercial customers?
Absolutely, absolutely. The intentions in all this is, we intend to create power, to get supply to our customers, which is not only stable but also quality, in the sense that we do not have these effects that you would see coming on board in overhead lines. This is a project that started some time back, and it is a project that is costing us 13.5 billion shillings to bring in a 220 kV underground cable from a substation in Embakasi to several substations within the CBD. Substations like what we have in Laiko Regency, what we also call the G1G substation, others in areas of Mamlaka, and so on and so forth. Like I said, the intention in all this is to improve the quality of supply to our customers. We are also using it, to create what we would call the flexibility in supply, so that in situations where we have one line, for example, supplying like Regency going down, then we can also use the underground supply to deliver power to the same point. This is what the engineers would call the N-1 factor. To create flexibility within the network.
Would you think the business community is happy with you? Because there is always that point, especially in doing business in Kenya, and that will always come up, especially with the Minister of Industrialization saying that how is the access of electricity, especially to commercial consumers? And I'm not sure how your cost has been, because most of them will say perhaps they'll need a lot of power and maybe there isn't quite that accessibility or isn't quite that reliability onto them. So if you will speak to a commercial consumer who's actually using your facilities right now and who's also thinking about setting up even a manufacturing unit in the country.
Thank you very much. I know we've had challenges in the past, and when I say challenges relating to both reliability and accessibility. But what we've done, we have worked, and more particularly we are working with Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Indeed, in the last 1 week, we were with the membership and the leadership of Kenya Association of Manufacturers in Mombasa. And what we are doing with Kenya Association of Manufacturers is ensuring that we have a membership which is happy. We have a membership which enjoys quality of supply, as it were. And do not forget, from where I sit as the person responsible for Kenya Power, this is the biggest source of revenue to ourselves, and therefore it is in our interest to ensure that that membership is comfortable, that membership is getting power that is quality, so that they can then engage themselves in their productive issues of the economy, as it were. So what we've done, and we are doing this alongside the leadership of Kenya Association of Manufacturers. We are ensuring that we go into a region like we went to Mombasa, identify the key challenges, we draw a roadmap, a matrix that looks at issues, what we need to do as KPLC, and by what timelines. And I want to let you know that when we went there in March, we identified such kind of issues. When I was there last week, we were just doing a checklist and basically taking out that this is what needed to have been done, and this is what we have done.
So talk to an investor then who's watching you right now and is actually willing to say, okay, well, Dr. Teresa, is there enough power that I can come in and set up my industry and just begin operations immediately?
If you look at the what you would call the total generation at this point, we are doing about 2,333 megawatts against a big demand of 1,650 megawatts. That tells you we still have some headroom. Of course, the generally accepted headrooms are normally in the range of 30-35%. As Kenya, we are currently doing about 29.5%, which in my view is well within what we think is acceptable. Now, when you look at the other things that are lined up, we have signed a lot of PPAs with independent power producers, and others are lined up in the course of that. We also have PPAs that have been signed, but looking at generations coming on board 2018, 2019, 2020, all the way. And therefore, I would want to encourage any investor that, look, if you are looking for an investment destination, Kenya is indeed one of those countries you should come into.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Dr. Teresa, I want to really engage you further on the feeder management program. This is a very new program that you're looking towards, that's increasing reliability and increasing access, especially to your retail consumers. What's the progress and what's your plan with this?
Thank you very much. This is something that, like you rightly pointed out, fairly new, and we are looking at sectionalizing our supplies into small feeders. and assigning supervisors to look at those feeders as it were. And what we expect from a supervision perspective is you are looking at the maintenance, looking at revenue collection, billing, and issues around revenue collection, together with meter reading. I know we've had challenges where a lot of our meters have been estimated, but this is when we now want to address those issues of estimating, so that as a feeder owner, then you have a number of items which you are responsible. And then, you know, the intention in all this is to ensure that we have quick responses to issues raised by our customers. We have quick responses to issues relating to metering, quick responses to issues relating to revenue collections, so that we then don't go to situations where we have our money out there for so long when we so much needed to reinvest in our operations.
Speaking of tampering of your meters, I mean, there's just a lot more on those cases, especially when you look at towards, you know, people saying that they don't have power, but what you realize is actually an issue of the tampering or tapping of your network. Have you managed to fully resolve this?
I would say, Alan, that these are things that, you know, we resolve as and when we progress, because you know, you have, and in every society, you will never miss to have this. We have people whose interest every so often is to tamper with, you know, operations of things such as meters. What we have done is instituted mechanisms within our institution which takes care of that. And you perhaps will have seen lately that, you know, we are a lot more appearing in court with people or customers who have tampered with our meters, customers who have, you know, call it stealing electricity, or basically consuming power that is illegally connected. Now we are addressing those challenges, but the idea in this feeder management program now is to bring closer the supervision of the feeder to the lowest point possible, so that in situations where it would have taken us, say, a month to respond to such issues, we will do it within a day or so. In this case, then, we will, you know, minimize those losses. And the effect of this, by the way, would be to increase our revenues and minimize the losses, which, just to give you a flavor, has been in the range of about 19.44%. Now, in this feeder, just to add a little, in this feeder management program, we at the moment have about 1,100 feeders. And when I compare to, say, about 4 years ago, where we had about 400 feeders, really the number of feeders has grown. And this is why I'm saying, in order then to manage this a lot more closely, we need to sectionalize and assign supervisors.
Dr. Tarus, I know you're here with very ambitious and a lot of points, especially looking towards how we can increase this power output, but you're also very serious, especially to your customers who haven't paid. Well, I know you also had recently. You also actually closed, selling keyboards because of unpaid dues. What would you say is your outstanding? If you just give an average, what's your outstanding bills, especially to both commercial and retail, that is actually lagging at Kenya Power right now?
Without getting into specific as to figures, allow me to say this. You know, every so often our billing cycle is such that it rolls. Yeah. Today you can be in arrears. When you pay, we invoice you the next week, and so on and so forth. So it is a figure that keeps rolling. But of course, having said that, my appeal to customers is, once you get your bill, please pay it to avoid disconnection or avoid getting into situations such as what you saw in Kibos.
But these are all state agencies. You're a state corporation. Is there perhaps maybe a more of a state-to-state kind of an agreement, especially because it's one government?
I agree, it's one government, but remember, the National Treasury, when it shares the cake, it allocates to departments within government. Now, those departments have their priorities, and I want to believe one of their priorities is to pay their bills, be it water bills, electricity bills, just like they pay their salaries. Yes. So I would expect, and I would urge institutions that, once you get your allocation from Treasury, please allocate resources for the payment of electricity and pay it when you receive your bill.
To avoid disconnection
To
and
avoid
inconveniences. Dr. Rest, before I let you go, I just want to pick your brain just on a very global perspective. There's a lot of push, especially in the world, towards green energy, a lot of push towards, just ensuring that we have clean sources of power. As Kenya Power, I don't know what are some of the initiatives that you're doing, even as you deal with distribution, but you also make sure that as a country, we actually are using green energy.
Like I said earlier, it's interesting because when you look at the generation mix, in the past we have had, a huge generation coming out of thermal. Then gradually we had hydros. But when you look at the generation mix as we speak, renewable sources is actually taking the lead. In our case, for example, about 49% of our generation mix comes from renewable sources. You are looking at solar, combined wind, and geothermal. Now, when you look at that as a country, in fact, we are almost rated as the country that actually uses the greatest sources of energy coming out of renewable sources. And therefore, what we have done is to encourage as much as possible, of course, from a PPA perspective, because that's where Kenya Power comes on board. From a PPA perspective, institutions that are looking at generating power using the renewable sources and getting a lot less of what is coming through the thermal sources.
Allow me to cut short. For to break it down to our viewers, the PPAs or public-private partnerships, looking at that, and of course also tapping a lot to other distributors or other energy creators who are also going into a lot more solar. We've seen a lot of an increase, especially to solar generators and what have you. So I don't know what's your call to them in terms of just even encouraging more of that. You should not quite be reliant on what Kenya Power might give, but also just being there also own producers of power, which you can actually even purchase.
You actually right, and it is clear that going forward, demand for power will be, and more particularly if you look at demand coming from SGR and the other investments through the Ministry of Industrialization, the SMEs and so on and so forth. So we would encourage a lot more generators, even if it's on small basis, come on board, generate, the market is huge.
Dr. Ken Terus, thank you so much for speaking with us. That has been none other than the Acting Managing Director of Kenya Power. Just getting more details into, of course, the feeder management program, where we are at with the last mile connectivity program. I think I like how you ended that if you think you can be a green energy generator, generate your power, and I think Kenya Power will be purchasing it from you. Well, we'd like to leave it at that. My name is Laban Cliff-Onsero. That has been kind of the business brief on NTV today. Brian Otwal, it's over to you with the sporting action.
Well, thank you, Laban. We look at more energy in sport.